Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Tuesday, the 16th of July in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Donald Trump appears at the Republican National Convention and selects Ohio Senator JD Vance as his running mate.
President Biden seeks to justify his rhetoric as he looks to stabilise his increasingly beleaguered re-election campaign.
Plus, Jerome Powell says recent data is raising the Fed's confidence that inflation is now on a path to 2%.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Donald Trump has made his first public appearance after a failed assassination attempt upended the US presidential contest. Walking on stage at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee with a bandage over his right ear, Trump was greeted by chanting supporters. The appearance came as Donald Trump named JD Vance as his running mate. The venture capitalist turned Ohio senator's embrace of populist politics has made him a rising star in the party. Speaking to Fox News after the announcement, with loud music in the background, Vance weighed in on the pair's foreign policy objectives.
I think what President Trump has promised to do is go in there, negotiate with the Russians and Ukrainians, bring this thing to a rapid close so that America can focus on the real issue, which is China. That's the biggest threat for our country, and we're completely distracted from it.
JD Vance also told Fox that he believes the US can be the main source of energy in the world. Vance is nearly 4 decades younger than Trump, and the party will hope his pick bolsters their appeal to white working-class voters in swing states.
Research from UBS shows that Donald Trump's full proposed tariffs on Chinese imports could cut China's growth rate in half. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has more.
Donald Trump is said to be considering a 60% tariff on Chinese imports if he's elected in November. Economists at UBS say that would slice 2.5 percentage points from China's annual growth rate. That drag would come from a drop in exports, but also a hit to consumption and investment. The forecast is based on an assumption that some trade would go to other countries, that China doesn't retaliate, and that other countries don't join the US position. Exports have been a strong driver of Chinese growth so far this year, with the trade surplus hitting a record last month. But that strength has also prompted complaints from other countries who are considering how to respond. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
Elon Musk is pledging to give $45 million a month to a pro-Trump political group. That's after the Tesla owner publicly endorsed the former president in a post on X last Saturday evening. The donation would flood the Trump campaign with cash until November's election, but Bloomberg Businessweek columnist Max Chafkin says the relationship benefits Musk too.
So Elon Musk is, of course, he is known as an innovator, but he's also been a very successful government contractor. You know, many of his businesses, much of his business depends on relationships with the government, either in terms of direct contracts with SpaceX, or Tesla, of course, depends on these tax credits and has for the entirety of its existence. So you can sort of see why he has an interest.
Bloomberg's Max Chafkin speaking there. Crypto billionaires Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss are also among the donors to America PAC, which is working to get voters to the polls in November. According to its most recent filing with the Federal Election Commission, the group started July with less than $1 million in cash.
Well, with the focus now on a resurgent Republican bid for the White House, President Biden has been forced to respond to Republican accusations over his role in raising the political rhetoric. In a primetime NBC interview, Biden defended his suggestion that Donald Trump should be, quote, put in the bullseye.
The truth of the matter was, what I guess I was talking about at the time was, there was very little focus on Trump's agenda.
Yeah, the term is bullseye.
It was a mistake to use the word. I didn't say crosshairs. I meant bullseye. I meant focus on him. Focus on what he's doing. Focus on his policies. Focus on the number of lies he told in the debate.
Biden also told NBC's Lester Holt that he has no plans to blunt his criticism of Trump, considering the stakes in the November election. The interview was Biden's latest attempt to stabilise his beleaguered re-election bid at a pivotal moment in the campaign. Democrats remain deeply split over Biden almost 3 weeks after his poor debate performance triggered panic about his ability to fulfil another 4-year term.
One of the most beleaguered bond trades of the past 2 years is getting new life thanks to the momentum behind Donald Trump's presidential bid. Long-term yields have come under pressure because of Trump's plans for tax cuts and higher tariffs, which traders calculate would ignite inflation and worsen US finances. The side effect of this is to reward investors who've wagered that the bond market will return to normal after an unusual stretch when short-term yields exceeded those on longer-term debt. On Monday, in the wake of the weekend's assassination attempt on Trump, the yield on 30-year treasuries surpassed the rate on 2-year notes for the first time since the end of January.
Jerome Powell says that recent data has provided policymakers with more confidence that inflation is heading towards the Fed's 2% goal. The Federal Reserve Chair highlighted the last 3 inflation readings while speaking at the Economic Club of Washington.
On inflation, in the first quarter, we didn't make any more progress. The second quarter, actually, we did make some more progress. We've had now 3 better readings, and if you average them, that's a pretty good pace.
Jerome Powell also insisted that he wasn't sending a message about rate cut timing in the conversation with the Carlyle co-chairman David Rubenstein. The Fed has held borrowing costs at the highest level in more than 2 decades for roughly a year now. The next FOMC meeting starts on the 30th of July, when central bankers are expected to hold rates steady once again. Now, in a moment, we are going to get more on Donald Trump picking JD Vance as his vice presidential candidate and also bring you more of our interview with the Fed Chair Jerome Powell. But firstly, just a word on the imagery of the Republican National Convention. You heard some of the chanting there. Donald Trump came into the hall with the bandage on his right ear to a standing ovation with all that chanting. But he actually didn't speak.
No, of course, not yet is the moment, because that will be the culmination of the RNC event in Milwaukee. But a hugely powerful image for his supporters. He mouthed thank you at people as they chanted towards him, pointed at a few people that he obviously knew in the crowd as well. This, while the audience heard from speakers who range from business executives to the head of the Teamsters Union, of course an important voice in the US as well, that parade of speakers at the first day of the RNC, though, depicting an America in which the speakers said working class families were struggling because of Joe Biden's agenda, seeking to tap into polls showing unease with the incumbent's economic policies, all part of the political theatre, of course heightened massively by the events over the weekend. And those chants, I think, will be another moment from this I suppose particularly heightened moment in the campaign. Let's bring in, though, our US government editor John Harney in Washington for more. Of course, the big news from Monday was the selection of JD Vance, the Ohio senator, as the vice presidential pick. John, what signal is Donald Trump sending by picking JD Vance, someone perhaps best known elsewhere for his book Hillbilly Elegy?
Well, that's right. He's picked in Vance a ardent, passionate loyalist who, if anything, perhaps embraces the populist cause even more than Trump himself. And that's true. While he's best known for Hillbilly Elegy, about his hardscrabble background, origins in Ohio, he also is a venture capitalist with connections to Silicon Valley, where a lot of very wealthy donors to both parties operate. That may well have been among Trump's considerations. But what the former president did not do was pick someone who was sort of outside his circle, like, say, Nikki Haley or someone like that, who could perhaps appeal to independent voters, say, or Republicans who might have misgivings about him.
Indeed. So then what about his positions on key policy issues? For example, on China, on Ukraine. We had a little snippet of him speaking to reporters in the US. What do we know about JD Vance's political positions?
Well, I mean, for one thing, on abortion, he's supported very strong restrictions that don't include exceptions for incest or much of anything else. And on Ukraine, he opposes any further aid, which would likely disappoint some members of the Republican foreign policy establishment. But that opposition will likely be whispered, if anything, because this is Donald Trump's party, and anyone he picked would be applauded, as of course Vance was today. And oddly enough, Mitch McConnell, the Senate minority leader, who's very much part of the Republican old guard on foreign policy and other issues, was booed at the convention today or yesterday.
And also, given his age, I think that's another significant issue. You know, there's also been perhaps an issue in this campaign around, the generational argument. At 39, Vance is half of Trump's age. Does this cement the sort of populist future of the Republican Party?
Who knows what the Republican Party will look like in, say, 8 years, but certainly for the foreseeable, and that question about what foreseeable means here, yes, this certainly establishes the populist dominance of this party, which has changed considerably since Donald Trump came down that escalator in 2015.
What does all of this mean for Joe Biden's campaign? We did hear from the president yesterday as well.
Well, he spent much of this interview with Lester Holt of NBC News, one, deflecting criticism over the bullseye comment that, of course, was made before this horrific and shocking assassination attempt on Saturday, but that many Republicans immediately accused Biden and the Democrats of provocation and created an atmosphere that could lead to violence. And so he kept trying to emphasize that, Donald Trump himself has made provocative remarks, throughout his political career. And, but he was on the defensive, even though he tried to get the conversation back onto Donald Trump.
Yeah, indeed. John, thank you so much for being with us. Our US government editor, John Harney, there in Washington to discuss, Trump's pick for vice president. Also, I think really fascinating on the Bloomberg terminal this morning. Bloomberg opinion columnist Patricia Lopez has been writing about JD Vance, the ultra-conservative senator from Ohio. She talks about him being the opposite of a unifier. I mean, this is also what we were discussing only yesterday about whether, and Trump wanting to be a unifier. She calls JD Vance an acid-tongued senator, young and vigorous inheritor of the MAGA movement. That he's got, a lot of political ambition, but not so much political experience. But the piece is very interesting.
Yeah, of course. I'm talking about JD Vance's journey as being someone who described himself as a never Trumper, yes. And then now to this position that he is as vice presidential picks. Definitely worth your time. Bloomberg.com/opinion to find that piece this morning. But let's turn to another one of our key interviews on the programme this morning. The Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell saying recent economic data giving policymakers greater confidence that inflation is coming down to their 2% goal. His comments potentially pave the way for interest rate cuts. Markets have priced in a first move for September. Now, Powell began by addressing the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. He was speaking to Bloomberg host and Carlyle co-founder and co-chairman David Rubenstein at the Economic Club of Washington, D.C.
It was really a very sad day for our country. Political violence has no place in our society, and I condemn it in the strongest terms. I know we all do. A man died at a political rally. 2 other people were critically injured. It's just a sad day. And I'll say that I'm grateful that the injuries to the former president were not more serious. I'd rather not comment on the markets. It's too...
Okay. So let's get another answer that you don't want to give.
No foreplay, huh?
So there are a few billion people in the world who are waiting to see what interest rates are going to be doing. Do you have any insights on where interest rates might be going?
So I'm going to take that as a great opportunity to talk a little bit about the economy and then talk about where that leaves us with policy. So I would just start by saying that the U.S. economy has performed really remarkably well over the last couple of years. 2023, last year, was a year in which the economy grew well above 3%. The labor market remained very strong, unemployment remained very low, and inflation came down at quite a sharp pace, particularly in the second half of the year, by a very large amount. And that forecast was almost unheard of. It was unheard of before 2023. So big upside surprise that year. This year, we had expected the economy to slow a bit gradually, the labor market to continue to gradually cool off after being overheated a couple of years ago, and inflation to continue to make progress. And something like that is basically what has happened. The economy is growing now at about 1.5% in the first half of the year. Most forecasters have about a 2% growth rate for the full year. The labor market, again, has moved into better and better balance to the point where I think you can now say it's essentially no tighter than it was in 2019 before the pandemic. Remember that the labor market of 2019 was a very strong labor market. So we're back to that place, no longer overheated. On inflation, in the first quarter, we didn't make any more progress. The second quarter, actually, we did make some more progress. We've had now 3 better readings, and if you average them, that's a pretty good pace. So turning to policy, your question, what we've said is that we didn't think it would be appropriate to begin to loosen policy until we had greater confidence that inflation was moving sustainably down to 2%. We've been waiting on that, and I would say we didn't gain any additional confidence in the first quarter, but the 3 readings in the second quarter, including the one from last week, do add somewhat to confidence. We've also said that, we're a dual mandate bank. For a long time since inflation arrived, it's been appropriate to focus mainly on inflation, but now that inflation has come down and the labor market has indeed cooled off, we're going to be looking at both mandates. They're in much better balance, and that means that if we were to see an unexpected weakening in the labor market, then that might also be a reason for reaction by us.
Okay, I think I understand. So to put it in terms I can for sure understand, the markets are suggesting, the futures markets, that there's a 90% chance that the Fed will lower its discount rate in September. Do you think the markets know what they're talking about?
So today I'm not going to be sending any signals one way or the other on any particular meeting. So just to ruin the fun right at the beginning. I simply, we're going to make these decisions meeting by meeting, and we're going to make them on the basis of the data as they come in, the evolving data, the evolving outlook, and also the balance of risks now that the 2 mandates are basically close to being in balance.
All right, there are some people who say that the Fed would not like to lower interest rates in a presidential campaign period because you could be criticized for helping one party or another. Do you have any comment on whether that's an accurate view?
I do. So our undertaking at all times is that we'll make our decisions based on the incoming data, the evolving outlook, balance of risks, and only on that. We don't take political considerations into account. We don't put up a political filter on our decisions. That would not. It's hard enough to make these decisions based on the appropriate factors. If you're going to add a whole different filter in an area where we're not experts, that's not going to improve the quality of our decisions, and it's also not the orders we have from Congress. Our orders from Congress are to use our tools to foster maximum employment and price stability, and to do so without political considerations. That's what we're always going to do. If you look at the modern record, that is what we do, and we don't think about election cycles or anything that's political.
The Fed has set a target for inflation of 2%. Now, can you clarify, does that mean that the inflation rate has to be at 2% before you're ready to move, if you are ready to move, or does it have to be within sight? And what does it mean to be within sight?
So when we change interest rates, that tightens financial conditions, and that in turn affects economic outcomes, growth, labor markets, and ultimately inflation, but with lags that can be long and variable, as Milton Friedman famously said. And the implication of that is that if you wait until inflation gets all the way down to 2%, you've probably waited too long, because the tightening that you're doing, or the level of tightness that you have, is still having effects which will probably drive inflation below 2%. So we've been very clear that you wouldn't wait for inflation to get all the way down to 2%. Our test has been for the past quite some time that we wanted to have greater confidence that inflation was moving sustainably down toward our 2% target. And what increases that confidence in that is more good inflation data. And lately here, we have been getting some of that.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.